Hello there, Evie here. Sorry for the lack of content. I've sort of been... That's a bit of a DIY project I'm working on in the background. I should be releasing a video about that in the nearish future, so if you're interested, stick around. But anyway, welcome to a bit of a double review between the Contac 21 Thermaltake cooler and the Raijintek Aidos, or Aidos Black. I believe it's pronounced Aidos. But anyway, something I learned a while back is Raijintek is really into mythology, and I believe Greek mythology in particular. They named their case, the Raijintek Styx, after the Styx, which is a Greek god, and I believe they named the Raijintek Aidos after Aidos, which is, I believe, the Greek goddess of shame. Maybe we shouldn't look too much into that. Anyway, in terms of availability, the Thermaltake Contac 21 isn't very widely available now. It's pretty much towards the end of its life. You can pick it up in some PC hardware stores, but in the UK I found it very hard to get from one of those. There was one, and I believe it was just one, available on Amazon. The Raijintek Aidos, on the other hand, though, is pretty widely available. But if you want to pick up either of them, you can head to the Amazon affiliate links in the video description and see if there's one there to buy. If you do buy anything through those links, it gives a small kickback to the channel, which is a nice way of giving, say, a little tip to the channel, which does help towards all sorts. So let's cut this intro short. There are timestamps available in the video description as usual, so skip to whatever part of the video you like whenever you fancy. If you get bored halfway through some point, I don't blame you. It's a pretty long review between the two. Anyway, I'll catch you in a second to start off with the unboxing. So, a double review of two coolers just shy of 140mm tall, with 4 heat pipes each. If this isn't a perfect embodiment of the backlog of work I've got to do for the channel, the Contac 21 is a discontinued product, but at least the Aidos Black is still in production. Let's keep this as short as an in-depth review can be and say the packaging for both was formed from cardboard and both coolers came with manuals and some parts bags. But let's get into the details of these coolers. The Contac 21 came with a pre-installed fan which can be left on, but we're removing it to get a closer look. I'm not overwhelmed by these fan clips, but they're fairly effortless to work with and there's no fear of scratching a finish. So for this cooler body comparison, the Contac 21 will be on the left and the Aidos Black will be on the right. The initial differences to pick up on are the slightly smaller height and higher fin density of the 136mm tall Aidos Black compared to the taller 140mm tall and lower fin density Contac 21. But differences aside, apart from their fin shape, there's an awful lot of similarities between these two coolers. First thing I picked up on after the central logo punched into the fins was the split fin clamping mechanism to the heat pipes. Since they're both using 6mm heat pipes, even the sizes are the same. The zip connection to the edges of the fins do seem a little different on first inspection, and the Contac 21 opts for 6 of these for an extra little bit of rigidity compared to the Aidos Black's 4. But on closer inspection, if you flip the Aidos over and take a closer look at both of them, you'll notice they use the same style connection. There's a few other similarities coming up, and this all leads me to believe that they have been manufactured in the same facility. It sounds like it makes sense to me, but if anyone knows anything different or more, please let me know in the comments. Either way, Thermaltake could have instructed the manufacturers to clip off or bend over the end of their zips. Moving on to base plates, there are more similarities, but a clear difference lies in the mounting mechanism which has dictated the size of these base plates. A lot more material has gone into the construction of the Aidos Black's base plate, which dwarfs over the Contac 21's. Now this one made me laugh. Take a close look at the base plate of the Contac 21. It helps if you can to go full screen. Can you see it yet? Okay, let me give you a clue. Now do you get, no? Well. On a close look at the heat pipe connection to the base plate, it looks like there's a few gaps between the pipes and aluminium on the side of the Aidos Blacks on the right. Right, cooler out of the way, now onto the parts bags. Oh, and the socket compatibility is on the screen now. This is everything of the two components bags laid out. Contac 21 is on the left again, and Aidos Black is on the right. The thing that stood out here to me was the base plate of the Aidos. Aidos. Just listen to how brittle this thing sounds. There's value engineering, and then there's this kind of low quality decisions of materials to save a penny or two. I get the impression that if I dropped it on a tile, it would shatter. Some people say I complain too much, but this is just unnecessary. Especially when the rest of the hardware is good, even including details like imprinting the CPU brand on the brackets, which isn't necessary, but clearly shows some extra thinking that didn't quite make it over to the baseplate division. But that's enough of the Aidos. How does the Contac 21 part stack up? Well, the backplate is the absolute polar opposite of the Aidos Blacks. Solid steel here, and the rest of the brackets are on par with most other coolers. But it's these nuts here that are gonna drive me nuts pretty soon. Look how freaking small they are. Adding to the same manufacturer theory, I think thermal paste is another clear similarity. The Contac 21 paste is on the left and the Aidos Blacks is on the right. Clearly we're not looking at anything special. In terms of fans, the Contac 21's fan is in every measurable way a worse performer than the Aidos Blacks, according to the manufacturer's testing anyway. Now, if they've both been tested by the same manufacturer that potentially made them, then they've potentially been tested on even ground. But we can't take that as read, so we'll be doing our own acoustic and thermal testing to see how they do later. Anyway, other factors that separate these fans include the finish of the wires. The Aidos Blacks clearly had a few more pennies spent in that region, and the fan of the Aidos seems to have a more pleasant shape and details in the fins and the frame. As for the manuals, the Contac 21 comes with a lot of text spread across many languages, and includes some small assembly diagrams on the left. I found the pictures were good enough to get an idea of how it works, so an in-depth read isn't really necessary. The Aidos Blacks manual improves on the diagrams over the Contac 21's, but contains a similar amount of wordiness compared to the Contac 21's. But again, I think the diagrams do a perfect job of translating the assembly instructions, so I don't think there's much point on reading. And that was going to lead me into a really cool affiliate link for Audible because of the manual and reading and stuff. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to make ties or connections with the affiliate program at Audible. So instead, I'm going to draw your attention very quickly to the Patreon page of AV and thank the kind souls who support or financially support AV on a monthly basis. Some people donate more than they should. Donate? That sounds like a charity thing. Some people support the channel more than they really should, but a huge thank you to you guys. And if you consider perhaps supporting the channel in that way, I'd be really grateful. It really does help the channel along, getting in components to review and such. So thanks guys who support it already, and thank you if you consider supporting the channel as well. Anyway, speaking of helping the channel out, this strong backplate of the Contac 21 is not only going to help me install the cooler, it's also going to help me highlight a huge weakness in the mount for this cooler. These nuts are a huge pain in the nuts to install. As far as I can work out, this is the intended way for these to be installed, with your fingers. You know how some coolers come with a standard Phillips 2 head screwdriver and you think it's a waste because who doesn't have a Phillips 2 screwdriver? Well, the Contac 21 comes with no tools at all and provides these very uncommon 3mm nuts, which at least I don't have the right screwdriver bit for. So unless you really want to screw yourself over, you'll want to tighten these down. The only thing I had to hand at the time was, well, since all of my tools were in the garage in a work-in-progress project, was my drill. I just tightened the jaws up enough to grip the nuts and set the clutch setting to 1, and then went as nuts as you can go on the lowest clutch setting. Moving on, the arms went on easily. Nothing to say there apart from don't use a drill for it. It's pretty stupid. The backplate fits the nuts through the other side of the board with a bit of friction between the nuts and the board. I think this will vary from each one off the production line, but with any luck this is as bad as the tolerance gets. The rest of the mounting went pretty well. I put way more Arctic MX2 thermal paste on than any sane person would for testing purposes, and these extended thumb screws did a great job of making a hand installation really easy. But in my shameful efforts to be thorough by removing the cooler to check the thermal paste application and discover any problems with removing the cooler, I came across this problem. Since I didn't have the right tool to hand to tighten the lower nuts down more than the screws above, like when the thread of a motherboard backplate holding a standoff gets shredded, pliers were needed to get this cooler off. This happens to 2 of the posts I was using. So how about the thermal paste? Well, it spread out pretty well, but there was a section to the lower right of the IHS that didn't get covered. Clearly sheer volume isn't everything, so I topped up the corner and the center of the IHS to prevent trapped air. And relax keyboard warrior, I've tested this style of reapplying a cooler before and the results easily fell within tolerance. Then I tried to use the thumb screw to quickly reapply the nut and back it off with some pliers, but there's no shortcuts to be taken here. The backplate needed removing, and I had to equip myself with some more appropriate tools, which I think got dangerously close to destroying the threads in the backplate. Jeez. Anyway, the cooler went back on without a problem. I just made sure I only tightened the thumb screws with the fingers and not with a tool, even though it has a screw head right at the top. Anyway, the fan clips worked pretty well here. They were nice and easy to slot back into place, but you might want to install the fan to the rear of the cooler if you want a full complement of high-profile RAM sticks. You may be thinking at this point, you should have installed the RAM first, noob. But if we overlay the side profile of the high-profile RAM sticks, we can tell that the fan clip bending down would clash, and there would be a slight clash between the fan frame and the RAM itself. And there's not much tolerance to shift the fan up either. Okay, so acoustics noise testing. Now, I had somebody a while back, quite a while back actually, complain about me talking during the acoustic testing part. He said I should shut up and there's no point in me talking. So my rebuttal to that is it's actually even more useful for me to talk before I let you listen to the sound of the fan. Because when I talk, you have one noise reference. When I do the reference click, which is this mouse, right next to the fan, there's another reference, and then when I let the fan run after the reference click, you know what it sounds like. So my rebuttal to that is, yes, it is useful, it's another data point, it's helpful, but it's not a data point that you can actually measure. It's subjective, it's a perceptive thing. But anyway, as always, my camera is set up with the microphone 60 centimeters away. It's on exactly the same settings. For my temperature testing, I have a thermometer that's always hung at the same place in this room over there, and we're just going to do a quick run through. Now, to condense the time of doing this testing, instead of me doing the sort of, this is 60%, this is 100% at this speed or whatever, I'm just going to show data on the screen, and I'm literally just going to skip to clips where I do my reference click and then you hear the fan go, and that'll give you a better idea. So the noise isn't going to change. I'm not going to change the levels in editing for this part at all. It will purely be exactly what's coming from the thing. So we'll start off at 20%, 60%, and then go to 100% speed, and we'll see what it sounds like. I'll give you all the data I can as we go through each one. So a couple of things I want to point out. Now, this fan spinning at 2,550 RPM is noisy. Small fans that spin fast are just going to be noisy. In fact, any fan that spins fast is going to be noisy, especially if it's on the cheaper end. Of course, more high-end ones with more complex bearings that are sort of more silence optimized or acoustically optimized, will have better sound profiles, but it's pretty noisy. But I wouldn't expect anyone to be running this at 100% RPM. Of course, if you're having to do that, then you would probably benefit from getting a larger fan. So up that case size and up the CPU cooler. But anyway, at the lower end noise, something you might not be able to pick up, which I'll try and give you some a little profile of now, a little snapshot of now. That was the motor noise. That was the low end noise. You can hear it's like the phase change. I'm not sure what the noise is. Let me know if you know in the comments. It's as if you're hearing the phase change. It like flip polarity, as it were, each time the motor's going around. And it's quite noticeable. On higher end fans and stuff, you don't hear this anywhere near as much, or if at all. But I can hear it on this one, and that could probably be quite annoying in a case that's not very weighty or not very sound dampened. So perhaps maybe getting some foam or something would reduce that. But then again, foam is good at low end noise actually, so yeah, maybe. But anyway, so you can hear it, so not great. Anyway, I'm going to shift on to, well, we'll shift on now in the video to doing the mounting of the Raijintek cooler, and then we'll go over the thermals afterwards and the acoustics before that. But anyway. Now onto the Aidos black installation. Earlier I found the backplate to be pretty damn cheap and chintzy, or at least it was made from very brittle plastic, but it gets worse when you combine the included nuts. You can see here they were trying to design it so that it would be gripped by the backplate, but I've seen this done so much better on other components with far less room to shake around. It's like driving a bolt with the wrong wrench. Unfortunately, there's no retention of the bolts when placing them through the motherboard tray. I can imagine this part would be much easier if the board wasn't fixed to the test bench or a case. However, if you start with the top two bolts and screw the plastic spacers over them, then move on to the lower bolts, it's a lot simpler. I thought I'd be more disappointed in these plastic spacers, but they worked out quite well overall, apart from one of the last ones which had a slightly misshapen thread. But since it's plastic, it could be reworked to some degree. The following sets of arms had some room to maneuver since they were designed for a few LGA sockets. I found a loose first installation followed by the premature installation of the cooler retention plate helped you eyeball a square installation more easily. Of course, the retention plate needs removing to install the cooler, and like with the Contac 21, we're liberally applying thermal paste to ensure there's more than enough here. Remember, more than enough has a negligible impact on performance. The worst that can come from it is wasted paste. I decided to not even bother trying to install the cooler on a vertically mounted motherboard. The retention bracket was never going to play ball that way, so I went straight for laying the motherboard flat. The installation of the CPU cooler was pretty clean from then on, so after it was installed, I removed the Aidos Black to take a look at the thermal paste spread. It was pretty messy, but that's expected from so much thermal paste, but clearly the installation wasn't providing full coverage. Now, I'm not saying that this is all the cooler's fault, there are certainly better ways of installing this cooler. I think the lack of coverage was down to placing the retention plate over the base plate after sitting the cooler on the IHS. So if you come across one of these styles of brackets, I'd recommend placing the retention plate on first and then more accurately lowering the cooler down onto the IHS. This should prevent you having to move the cooler into position after, which can spread the thermal paste unevenly. Now for installing the fan. This has to be my favourite part of the Aidos Black installation, which really surprised me. Supplied are these rubber posts which need pushing and pulling through the fan screw holes. Then you can hold the fan roughly in position against the cooler and push the rubber posts through the channels formed by the cut and pressed fins. This strikes me as an excellent idea since you won't have to wear out the plastic screw holes through multiple installations, it doubles up as a vibration dampener, and it's surprisingly simple to install. But a counter argument to these is that you could accidentally break them and they'll get more brittle over time, which is probably why they include a spare. But installation is only one half of the story, disassembly is the other. I was curious to know what these things were like to take off, and since I pushed the thinner tabs into the cooler so they wouldn't look weird, I got myself into a sticky situation. So the fan was off, but a couple of posts were still stuck. After some time I found that these were easy enough to remove by applying a moderate amount of tension and then letting them work themselves out of the fins. And a final point for installation, unlike the Contac 21, you can install higher profile RAM here, but only just. So with the installation out of the way, how about some subjective acoustic testing? So we've got this now ready to do acoustic testing. I'm going to do the reference click. I'll let sort of details of speeds and percentages of the PWM at the bottom of the screen somewhere, and yeah, we'll just go through each step, and then what I'll do actually is I'll line up both of them one after another at each different fan speed and see what they sound like in comparison, and then we'll go over all of the thermals. So starting at 1000 RPM, about 950 RPM, this is what it sounds like. So as last time, if you don't want to hear me talk crap about my experience being right next to the thing, then please skip ahead, timestamps below. But I gotta say, just on a perceptive sort of level, the motor is way quieter. There's no, switching of polarity or anything. I've talked about brushes and brushless and whatever. No, these are all brushless motors. You only get brushes in big motors really, or really old small ones I can imagine. Maybe, but yeah, brushless motors. But it must be the polarity switching. Again, if you know in the comments. I can't hear that with this fan. It's very quiet. So I'd say at 20% and 60%, very serviceable, very reasonable. But 100% again, too much. If you get this and you're running a high power CPU, you may struggle to keep it below the 60% when you're really pushing the CPU. No doubt you would be. But we'll find out in the testing exactly how it performs, especially against, say, the 120mm tall D9L. Hopefully it performs well against that. It's got a slightly higher fin density than the Contac 21. And yeah, we'll see what that turns out to be though in a second. So hope you enjoyed so far, and I'll catch you in a second. Catch you in a second. I always say that. I always say catch you in a second, and really I should say on with the next part. So, yeah. So I hope you found the acoustic testing and comparison useful. Like I mentioned in a small bit of text, although the camera view changed from each test, it's only the field of view that changed from a zoom in on the lens of the camera. A 60cm microphone distance and the settings were maintained throughout. Now onto some thermal testing. I performed a total of 10 tests on both coolers that were repeated and averaged to provide these sets of data. A quick once over of what we're looking at here before we move on to the other tests. The grey bars represent frames per second performance results. These change relatively insignificantly throughout. The blue bars represent CPU temperature in a delta T format. I go for delta T formats to make the comparison more simple. It's just a case of subtracting the varying temperature from test to test from the result of the temperature sensor. And the purple bars represent cooler height. I feel it's quite a useful metric to gain a real-world understanding of how efficient and effective each cooler is. Last few points, the basic test bench spec is at the top, more information can be found in the video description. The graphs are ordered by CPU temperature, and all the fans on the test bench were running at full speed to remove the variables of fan curves. So what you're seeing here is a best case scenario for the CPU coolers during these tests. So getting into some comparisons, starting off with the physics test of Firestrike, we see the Aidos Black a fair few places ahead of the Contac 21 at nearly 3 degrees cooler, which is quite impressive since it's a slightly smaller cooler. However, you can see that there are more expensive and slightly smaller options around, such as the NH-D9L, which are still competitive here. Moving on to the combined test, the Aidos Black maintains its position, while the Contac 21 drops back a couple of places, leaving a difference between the two of nearly 3.5 degrees. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, but I'd expect that gap to increase as the fans slow down to a more reasonable level. Onto some graphics-based benchmarks with lower CPU usage. We'll jump past these rather quickly since low CPU usage tests can be a little vaguer. The gap increases in Unison Heaven to 4.6 degrees, just ahead of the similarly sized Hyper 103. And Superposition as a very low CPU load benchmark closes the gap to 1.6 degrees. You'll really need to take these lower CPU power tests with a large pinch of salt, maybe a vat. Anyway, moving past that vat of salt into another one, Rise of the Tomb Raider has produced a rather interesting dilemma here. Now, although the tolerance has to be taken into account here, if we were to believe the results from all these tests as they stand, we have to believe that the Aidos Black in this admittedly not high CPU load benchmark came out on top of the Dark Rock 4. This is even after I threw out a rather odd second result of the Aidos Blacks. Let's put this one down to low CPU load usage weirdness. Onto Hitman. Here we see some more believable results. Now, I've not put much attention on the Contac 21 here, so let's see where it's at. The Contac 21 is performing admirably against the larger Hyper 212 Evo, although it's considerably noisier, but it's also right up against the Master Air Pro 3, which was also running in silent mode. Well, the Aidos Black is definitely excelling ahead of all the 140 and 125mm coolers, but still behind the 120mm tall D9L. That thing is insanely hard working for its size. And lastly, for the gaming benchmarks, we have GTA 5. Here we have more of the same, and we're looking at a nearly 6 degree difference between the Contac 21 and the Aidos Black. But now we need to move on to the real challenge, the benchmark that separates the fridges from the freezers, Prime 95. Now this really is the decider behind which cooler has the most potential. The Contac 21 can be found about a third down the list, just before the coolers drop off into the low profile downdraft style, which isn't a comfortable place to be. But the Aidos Black is just below the halfway mark, exactly 5 degrees cooler than the Contac 21. This puts it right up against the Hyper 212 Evo and just ahead of the 3-heap-hyped Master Air Pro 3, but still behind the D9L rocket. It's actually just the NH-D9L, but that thing packs a punch. So it's probably a good idea that the Contac 21 is out of production now, and it is towards the end of its life. It isn't performing as well as, surprisingly, the Raijintek Aidos, which is still widely available. And on that note, it performs very similarly and is relatively similarly priced to the Master Air Pro 3 from Cooler Master, which is actually on my shelf back there, but I'm pointing means nothing to you. Actually, I might have a thing up there for the Master Air Pro 3. But anyway, it does perform similarly to that and is similarly priced. So essentially, you can look at both of them, find the cheapest one, and purchase that one if you were deciding between the two. But of course you can vary your search. But obviously there are better performing coolers, but price to performance wise it might be a little struggle actually to find one performing like this one was for its price. But anyway, one thing I'm going to do now is a bit of a talk about a comment that came through actually not that long ago. But for the people that stuck around to this part of the video and were only interested in the coolers, thanks so much for checking this one out. If you want to pick up the coolers in Amazon, then you can go to the Amazon affiliate links in the video description, and it will give a small kickback to the channel. So thanks for watching the video, and I will catch you in the next one if you stick around and subscribe. But anyway, one thing I wanted to go over was a comment that was left not long ago. I will show it up here. And it was basically saying between all of my talking, I was talking a lot of crap essentially, or there was a lot of criticism, something along those lines, about the Cooler Master Master Box Q300L. Now, here's the thing. Here's the comment I have about talking your mind and that sort of stuff, and having your opinion and putting it out on a video. If you are making a review or a critique video which is including your opinions, then in my opinion, you should give your raw opinion without any sort of filtering, as it were. It's good sometimes to take a step back, think about things sometimes, but if you're including raw opinion on your video, such as a review about the case I was reviewing, which was the Q300L, then if you're gonna dampen what your actual opinion is, then you are, I mean, in a sense, it's kind of like somebody shilling a product. You're trying to please either the manufacturer of the case, or the person who gave it to you, or your audience and the viewers that are watching your video. You're trying to please them. Why else would you be doing that? So my opinion is, no, I'm not going to dampen down what I think. Sometimes it's good to take a step back and work out whether something is flawed or actually good, but the opinions I had about that were very specific and isolated to that case. It was very much a case of the offside panel did a far better job than the windowed side panel of being retained on the case. You could unscrew it, it would hold itself, it was great. But if you unscrewed the Windows side panel, for some reason, not as much attention went into its retention when you've unscrewed the side panel. So that was basically my opinion, and I said that, and this person didn't like it, and basically said, "You hurt my feelings. I'm just letting you know." I actually responded to the comment and said, "And?" question mark, after about 3 or 4 minutes of them posting it. I haven't heard a response back, and that was about, I don't know, an hour ago. So, yeah, like, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings, but frankly, you're feeling way too much about something that you don't actually have. Get the thing yourself, make a video about it, put your opinions on show, and, if your opinion's different, then great. But I'm just going to put mine out there raw, just so people know exactly what I think, and then they can gauge something based on the biases I have. Biases to which are completely natural. People have natural likes and dislikes, and they come from their past experiences, and you can't prevent them. You can't stop them from coming through in a video, unless you make a purely objective review, in which I think there have been a few online which are hilariously awful and very boring. So yeah, that's pretty much that. Anyway, thanks guys, I will catch you in the next video. Sorry for the delay on videos, but hopefully I'll start rolling them out every other week, and then maybe pick the pace up when things get a little bit less busy. So, cheers guys, catch you then, bye bye.